based on what you've read in the indictment and what you've seen, by the way, the FBI handled the arrest this morning, is there anything here particularly concerning for the White House that we didn't already know about?
Well, it's always concerning to the White House because the obvious purpose of these arrests, all of them, is not to go after the people who are arrested, whether it be Manafort, Flynn, or Stone. It's to put pressure on them to provide information against the president. This is not me speaking. It's Judge Ellis, who was the presiding judge in the Manafort case. He said they're not interested in Mr. Manafort. They're interested only in what Mr. Manafort can give them in order to either prosecute or impeach Trump. And so this follows a long and very, very questionable pattern of how Mueller operates. He almost has never found any indictments based on conduct relating to Russia that occurred before he was appointed. His job was to find crimes that had already occurred relating to Russian collaboration, Russian conspiracy. He's really come up pretty much empty on that. Virtually all of the crimes that he's found fall into three categories. What I call process crimes, that is, crimes that grow out of the investigation itself: obstruction of justice, perjury, false statements, tampering with witnesses, right. Crimes that, in fact, were caused by the investigation. That's one category. A second category is old crimes that have no relationship to Russia at all, going after Cohen for taxi medallions, going after Manafort for bank fraud in order to squeeze them. And then the only case involving Russia and involving a prior crime is the Russians who were indicted, but that's just a show indictment because nobody is going to bring the Russians to the United States, and they're not coming to Disneyland to surrender to American authorities. So in the end, I think Mueller comes up with almost nothing relating to the actual goal or role that he was asked to perform, namely to find crimes that had already occurred relating to Russia by Americans. He's virtually zero on that. And that raises some really troubling questions for civil libertarians. Mm-hmm. Is it proper to go after witnesses like Stone and Manafort and Flynn in order to squeeze them? As Ellis said, not only do they sometimes sing, but sometimes they compose. They make the story better in order to get a better deal. So civil libertarians ought to be concerned about that. But very few civil libertarians are, because the object of this is obviously to get Trump. And most civil libertarians despise Trump. And they are fair weather civil libertarians. They promote civil liberties only when it helps their side, but not when it helps the other side.
Professor, let me ask you this, though, because to the point you just made, which I wholeheartedly agree with, we're seeing that again here. Roger Stone isn't even being accused of any old crimes. These all appear to be under that first category, process crimes, false statements, obstruction, potential witness tampering. Nothing about taxes, nothing about hidden fees to foreign governments. And then you have the prosecutor on Mueller's team who's tasked with investigating and prosecuting Roger Stone, Jeannie Rhee, who in her private sector life was a lawyer not only for the Clinton Foundation, but for Hillary Clinton. At which point does this all become so problematic, so conflicted, that Roger Stone's lawyer might have grounds for a dismissal on that, or does he? Or are they just going to have to take this?
I don't think he does. The closest anybody ever came was Manafort, because he had a judge who was very, very critical of Mueller, criticized him up and down, but then did not, in the end, dismiss the indictment. And Manafort was, of course, convicted and then pleaded to the second charge. So, no, I think this has to be considered in the court of public opinion. But I think, again, all civil libertarians ought to be very concerned. Look, you arrest this guy in a dawn raid, handcuff him, put him in shackles, and then you don't even ask the judge to raise the bail, $250,000, which is nothing bail. Clearly, this was just a show, an attempt to put pressure. Normally, people like this aren't arrested. Their lawyers get a notice, please self-surrender, appear in the federal court this morning at 10 o'clock. That's the way it's done. But when you're dealing with the mafia, the mob, you arrest people. Or when you think they're likely to flee, you arrest them. But obviously, the government doesn't think he's going to flee, or else they would have asked for him to be remanded, or would have asked for a fair bail to $250,000. So this was a show arrest. And as civil libertarians, we ought to be very concerned about that. Yeah. But I think I'm the last civil libertarian standing.
You're not supposed to use these types of things to make a point. That's clearly what they're doing here. I want to take a listen to something that Sarah Sanders had to say about Stone's indictment. Let's take a listen.
I think the biggest takeaway that we have is what I just said. This doesn't have anything to do with the president, doesn't have anything to do with the White House. One question that I would be interested to see is if this same standards apply. The charges that have been brought are about false testimony. If those same standards will be applied to people who we know have given false testimony in the same matter, like Comey and Clapper and Clinton and others that are in a similar position, I'd be interested to see how that plays out.
I'd be interested too, Alan. She's clearly trying to deflect there. That's what press secretaries do. But she does make a point. She's accusing James Comey, Jim Clapper, and Hillary Clinton of giving false testimony. Is there a double standard in your opinion?
There is a double standard. I would resolve it by having none of them prosecuted. I don't want to see criminalization of policy and political differences. I don't want to see the weaponization of the criminal justice system. And we're seeing that by Comey, and two wrongs don't make a right. I don't want to see it directed against we're seeing it by Mueller. I don't want to see it directed against Comey or Clinton or any of the others. Let politics be politics. Let criminal actions be reserved only for real crimes. You know, this indictment is very interesting because it tells a lot of stories about WikiLeaks, but those aren't charged. They're just their stories. And he can't defend against them because he's put on trial. He's not accused of anything relating to WikiLeaks. He's only accused of giving false testimony and tampering with witnesses. So what we're seeing is the indictment is puffed up with all kinds of allegations and stories. The same thing was done, I think, in the Cohn indictment, where they gratuitously threw President Trump into it when President Trump, as a candidate, had the right to contribute as much money as he wanted to his own campaign. There's an enormous difference between what Cohn is allowed to do as a lawyer and what the candidate himself is allowed to do. So I think we're seeing in these indictments manipulation in order to prevail in the court of public opinion. The irony is that this kind of an indictment, which we civil libertarians sometimes call singing indictments, was invented largely by Rudy Giuliani when he was the U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York. He used to have these mafia indictments, which you could practically hear the music from the mafia playing in the background, in which he would say, this conspiracy began in Sicily in 1902. And then he would give the whole history of the mafia and finally would get to the 2 or 3 charges against the defendant. As a civil libertarian, I objected then, and as a civil libertarian, I object now.
Professor, let me ask you this before we let you go. We only have about a minute and a half left. You've been through many of these criminal trials. How commonplace is it to do what Mueller has done? Mueller is prosecuting all these people on Team Trump of these process crimes, while at the same time, it appears that every relevant player on Team Hillary was given immunity. Cheryl Mills, Tony Podesta, they were all given immunity to avoid being charged with these process crimes. No one on Team Trump was offered that. It looks very bad. In your extensive experience, how commonplace is that?
Well, it's common when the mafia is on trial. When the mafia is on trial, you know, you give immunity to killers, people who have committed multiple crimes. We've seen that over and over and over again in order to get the real target. And again, civil libertarians have been upset about that, even in the context of mafia trials. But when it comes to President Trump, civil libertarians, particularly the American Civil Liberties Union, has fallen asleep because their goal is just get Trump at any cost. And the Civil Liberties Union has made a fortune on this. Their budget went up from $30 million to $130 million as soon as they started to go after Trump, but they've forgotten about civil liberties. And that's why, although I voted for Hillary Clinton and I'm a liberal Democrat, I'm standing up for civil liberties on a neutral basis, no matter who is the target, who is the subject, even if it's somebody I didn't vote for.
Somebody's got to do it.
Somebody's got to do it. Glad it's you. Harvard Law Professor Alan Dershowitz. Thanks, Professor. Always great to see you.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to see more live breaking news coverage, exclusive interviews, and videos from Newsmax TV, click subscribe on our YouTube channel, and don't forget to download the free Newsmax TV app for alerts. Newsmax TV, it's real news for real people.